Next thing we're going to talk about is how to prepare for a mock trial. This is a general overview, and it's not necessarily in the order that you're going to be doing it. But these are all of the activities that throughout the semester that you're going to be performing as we lead up to the mock trial itself. And you follow your guide, and you follow the instructions, and you at different points in the semester will begin to do these different tasks. But let's just do a general overview of what you're going to be doing in this semester for this mock trial. The very first thing that you need to understand is the roles. We've talked a lot in the other videos about what the role of the prosecution is. They have to prove that someone broke the law, or the plaintiff, they have to prove that somebody did something to someone else. The role of the defense is to, they don't have a burden to prove anything, but they are to discredit the case put on by the prosecution. The only way that you can understand really the roles is to read your packets and understand the story of the case. And when you begin to do that, when you begin to read the witness statements, when you begin to look at the evidence that's used in the case, you'll begin to understand the roles of the parties to the case. But for this, if it's right now, just for this time, if it's a criminal case, you should think that the role of the prosecution is try to convince the jury that the person broke the law, and that the defense's role is trying to discredit the prosecution's case. So that's understanding the roles of the parties. Also, you need to understand the case. Everything comes down to this: who, what, when, where, why, and how. That's what the case is about. Every witness statement, every piece of evidence should be answering those questions: the who, what, when, where, why, and how. When you're understanding the case, you're going to look at the witness statements, right? And you're going to begin to analyze the witness statements, asking yourself the whole time, why is this important? Whose side does this support? Where is this important? And how does this help me prove my case if I'm one side? Or how does it discredit the case if I'm the other side? And you'll begin to develop a timeline. And you'll also look for a relationship between the different witnesses in your case, and not only the relationship between the witnesses, but also the relationship of the witness to a piece of evidence. So, for example, if you have a doctor and a doctor has a photograph or a drawing that they've created of a body, that doctor's testimony has a direct relationship to their report and also their diagram that they've created of the body. If you have a police officer and they have a witness statement and a police report, that relationship of that police officer is to those documents. Okay, so that's the things that you should be looking for, understanding the case. Big thing that you need to know is the facts of the case. You need to know which facts strengthen each side. So which facts in this packet support the prosecution as they're trying to prove that someone broke the law, and then which facts weaken each side. So are there facts that weaken the prosecution's case that somebody committed murder? The reverse would be for which facts support the defense side. What are the facts that are in the packet that support the defense's case? And are there facts in the packet that weaken the defense's case? So you need to read the case, look at the witness statements, look at the documents, and begin to ask yourself, does this strengthen one side or the other? And does it weaken one side or another? Part of that process is analyzing the witness statements. In the next couple of weeks, you're going to be spending a lot of time rewriting the witness statements in your own words. That's so you can learn exactly what the witness statement is. You're going to be creating Annie charts. And your Annie charts, I would recommend that if you are looking at a witness statement for the police officer, for your A, I would recommend that you would put in facts in your Annie chart that support the prosecution's theory that somebody broke the law. And then if you're using the police officer again, I would look for facts that would support the defense's case in your N column. And when we talk about Annie charts, For I would put in things that are interesting. They may benefit both sides. They may not benefit one side or another, but they just might be interesting to help tell us about the character. Because remember, in this mock trial, you're breathing life into these characters. So that's what you're going to be doing as part of your witness statement. You're going to be rewriting them and preparing Annie charts. Later on, when you get further on in the process, you're going to decide the order of the witnesses and how they're going to testify. That's something collectively you'll do as a team, whatever side you're on, and you're going to, based on your strategy, which we'll talk about later, you're going to decide what order your witnesses are. And that, I will tell you, you may have an idea at this point, as you start going through the packet, of what order that you think the witnesses should testify. That can change, and that's something I can never help you do, because this is your case, and you must decide what order the witnesses are going to testify in, based on some reason, some logic that you have as a team, that this is why we're going to call the witnesses in this order. Other thing you're going to do, prepare for a mock trial, is you're going to create direct examination questions. Probably never in your academic career have you ever done this, but the mock trial packet's going to help you get through that, and I'm going to do a separate video about direct and cross-examination questions. But when you're creating direct examination questions, let's say, I'm going to give you an example of it. Let's say you have a police officer who's going to testify and you're on the prosecution side. The witnesses that you're calling for your prosecution, like the police officer, you ask them direct examination questions. On the other side, the defense would ask defense questions. And we'll talk about this when it's an order of trial, but direct examination questions are questions asked by your witness that you call, and these questions are open-ended questions. So if I was going to call a police officer to testify about his police report and what he investigated, it would go something like this. Officer blank, tell us your full name. How long have you been employed by as a police officer? Where do you work? What training and experience do you have? Another question I might ask, and as he's answering this, and I'm moving through this, and I would say, on December 31st, 2019, were you working as a police officer? What did you do? And if the case is about something that happened on December 31st, 2019, my questions now are moving from my background about the police officer, and we're moving into the case. And my questions now are going to start heading towards supporting my theory and proving the elements of the case. If I need this police officer to help me prove murder, I'm going to bring him into the murder scene and talk about maybe a confession by the defendant or maybe a statement made by a witness. That's all of these things that are all pointed back. When I'm asking direct examination questions, are all pointed back to my burden of proof for me to prove my case. These are all open-ended questions. Hopefully, if you've done a good job, my witness knows the questions I'm going to ask them, and I know the answers they're going to give. This is not a time for surprise. These are all questions like, tell me your name, tell me your experience, were you working as a police officer, what did you see, what happened next, what did you do? Boom, those are your questions. Cross-examination questions are the opposite. These are leading questions. So going with my police officer example again, let's say I was the defense and the police officer just testified for the prosecution, and now the defense is going to cross-examine him. I would ask questions not like open-ended like the prosecution did, where they said, officer, tell me your name. My questions would be leading. Officer, isn't it true that your name is Derek Klepper? Yes or no? Officer, you were working as a police officer on December 31st, 2019, weren't you? Yes. And isn't it true that on that night you were working alone, weren't you? That's a yes or no answer. And when you went to the scene of the crime, you were the only law enforcement officer at the scene of the crime. Isn't that true? Yes, no. You notice all those questions suggest an answer. I didn't say, what did you do that night to leave it opened? I said, you went to the house, didn't you? Yes or no? And the goal of cross-examination is begin to discredit the testimony given on direct, but also it's to control the witness. I am leading that witness to a place that I want them to go to. And my job in cross-examination is to begin to break down. They've built up their case on direct examination and they've painted a picture of what occurred. Now my job when I'm cross-examining a witness is to discredit that witness. And I do that through the form of open-ended questions that only call for a yes or no answer. So just because a question does call for a yes or no question doesn't automatically make it leading. The difference between a leading and a direct question is simply this. In a leading question, it suggests the answer. It rained today, didn't it? You're 5'7", aren't you? You're a male, aren't you? You're in CC, aren't you? Those are all suggesting the answer, yes or no. So that's how we do leading questions, and I'll do a separate video on direct examination and cross-examination. But for this point, I just wanted to expose you to that. This is a really hard concept that we're going to spend a lot of time on, is formulating a legal strategy. It's going to be up to you to formulate a legal strategy. I can't help you come up with that. I can come up with some that, because I've been doing this mock trial now for a couple of years, that I believe are a good legal strategy. But this is for you, and this is your case. You're going to have to come up with a theory and a theme, and you're going to own this theory and this theme. So your theory of the case is what you believe happened. Okay, you have an idea of what happened based on the evidence, but what is your theory? What really happened that night? Now, your theme is something that you're going to use to continue to prove your theory of the case. So, if it was a drunk driving case, and your theory would be don't drink and drive, then if you drink, you die, or something like that, that would continue to be waived throughout your case. You're going to develop this theory. You know, Nancy Reagan had a theme when she was against the drugs in the 80s was just say no. Constantly just say no, just say no, just say no. That could be a theme of a case. And it's a repetitive idea that you weave throughout your case, attached to your theory, and you're going to begin to formulate this with your classmates. And everything then goes back to what is your theory of the case, and how does that tie into your theme? One of the hardest things for lawyers to do, so it's going to be really hard for middle school students to do, but I'm going to give you some examples in another video that are not related to this mock trial, that are just related to trials in general, of themes and theories, so that you can use those, I think, as illustrations to begin to develop what I'm excited to see what you create. This is what this is about, is you creating this. But you need to create a theory and a theme. You're also going to be developing opening statements and closing arguments. Notice I said statement and argument here. So your opening statement is your overview of the case. Your closing argument is your argument about, you're closing everything together, and you're talking about why you believe something happened the way it did, and why the evidence supports your theme and your theory of the case, and why you should believe certain witnesses or not. We're not arguing in opening statements. We're arguing in our closing argument. I don't expect you to understand that now. I'm going to do another video on the steps in a trial, which I think will help solidify that. But just right now, a general overview. Now, one thing, real quick, so I know this is going over. You're going to be tempted very early on to jump to theory and theme. Very early on, it's very common working with CC students in mock trial that in the first, probably third, fourth week, when you start to get comfortable with the material, you're going to start talking theory and theme and begin to formulate strategies. I encourage that, but however, one thing you must continue to do is you have to do the work on the back end. You can't do that at the expense of these steps. Most important part of the work you're going to do is right here. You're going to learn the facts of the case, and you're going to analyze the witness statements. You're going to rewrite them, and you're going to begin to do anti-charts. And it's going to feel like this is really boring. This is going to be, it's very time-consuming. To do it right takes a lot of time. But what I promise you, I've seen this years and years and years of CC work, that if you put the time in the beginning, At the end of the case is when you can start to really enjoy yourself, and it starts to make sense. It'll all fall into place, and trust me on this, because it works every single time. The only way, though, that it works is if you put the work in. You must rewrite the witness statements. This is not a time for you to say, I'm not going to do this witness statement. I'm not going to rewrite it. If you're just, you won't be able to successfully do your case. You're going to get tired of doing Annie charts on these 5 witnesses. You must do these charts because this will help you learn the case. One thing that I like to say is that trying a case is like this. It's like building a brick wall. And as you build this brick wall, you start with your foundation and you work your way up. Here's where we are right now. We are building the base of the foundation of our brick wall. Way up here is theory and theme. We must lay the foundation of our witness statements and our Annie charts before we can jump up and begin to do opening statements, closing arguments, direct examinations. You cannot do a proper outline of a direct examination or a cross-examination until you've done this down here. It's impossible. Until you learn the facts of the case, until you learn the witness statements, and until you do your Annie charts, you're not ready to do direct examination or cross-examination. You must put this work in first. I'm going to do separate videos about that, and it'll help you. But for this point, get started with your witness statements and your Annie charts, and we'll talk more again later. Thank you.